Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes once everyone's had a chance to dial in, so just bear with us for a couple more moments. Okay, hi everyone. Just want to start off with a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the session. So first off, just a quick sound check. If you can hear me okay, please can you just let me know by putting a quick message in the chat box. Perfect, thank you. So in terms of the structure for today's webinar, we'll start with an introduction to open access at the Bill Melinda Gates Foundation from Ashley, who will then introduce us to Gates Open Research and the fundamentals of the platform. You'll then hear from me. I'm Hannah, and I'll introduce the International Conference on Family Planning Gateway. We're really keen to save some time for Q&A at the end of the session. Just as a reminder, you're all automatically muted, but if you have any questions throughout the session, please pop them into the questions box, which you should see on the grey panel at the side of your screen, and we'll address as many of those as we can at the end of the session. So that's it for the instructions. I'll pass over to Ashley to begin today's session.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me all right? Awesome, and you can see the slides. So my name is Ashley Farley. I am a program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, working in the Knowledge and Research Services team. Gates Open Research is one of my favorite projects, so I'm really excited to share it with you today. I wanted to quickly touch base on kind of our overall policy at the moment. So as some may be aware, we have joined Coalition S, and that means we have implemented the Plan S principles into our policy starting January 1st of this year. There has been a journal checker tool that's been released to help everyone navigate through the policy and different routes to implementation and compliance. And of course, Gates Open Research is fully open access and well aligned already with those principles. And just some of the key changes that I wanted to discuss. So if you are a Gates Foundation grantee or work with our grantees, the biggest things that have changed is just kind of implementation, which routes are available. So we've never had kind of a green open access route. So that kind of manuscript sharing in the repository is now supported, which I'm really excited about. So that allows for any journal to be compliant as long as you share your author accepted manuscript with the CC BY license in a repository. And then we're changing kind of what we pay for. So we're really starting to take a look at the data that we have around what we've paid for in the past, and we will no longer be paying for hybrid journals, but only kind of gold open access, or any journals that are in some sort of arrangement to become fully open access. So those are just a few of and we're working on making our underlying data more robust and focusing on data available as daemons. So a lot of exciting stuff coming down the line around open access that I think many of our grantees and authors will find exciting. But right now I'm going to focus on Gates Open Research. This is why I think the foundation, and especially myself, view this kind of model as the future of publishing. To me, it solves a lot of the problems that we see in traditional publishing. So some of those pain points I think this model overcomes is kind of journal shopping or cascading, which can be time consuming and resource intensive. The focus on journal scope or novelty, reliance on kind of terrible metrics like the impact factor, the kind of disconnect that there can be between preprints and the version of record and the review that happens along the way, lack of versioning in general, and I'll show some examples of how Gates Open Research in the F1000 model does this really well in solving this issue, and kind of how the traditional process is really not transparent, and there's often lack of data associated with those articles. So I've always wondered, how do we accurately peer review things, or what is the role of peer review in the traditional process when there's little transparency? And I think as a reader of research, we put a lot of trust in kind of the journal brand and that these things have happened, but we really don't have the evidence to prove that. So what does the model look like? So it's a fully open post-publication peer review. So an article is submitted, it does go through some initial checks, and part of that check is making sure that there is the underlying data available. If it can be made available, then we make a statement of why it can't, which I think is important, or where that data is housed or where it comes from. So if another researcher or reader wants to be able to confirm, they can go and find it for themselves. We understand that not all data can just be openly available. It then goes through kind of an open peer review process, and we'll go through that. And once it's passed those checks, it is then officially indexed and kind of considered a more final version, but I'll talk a bit about the nuances there. So what does this look like? So this is, it's hosted. You can see the different versions in the peer review status. So if it's something that hasn't, been peer reviewed at all yet, it'll be very clear that that's the case, that it's waiting for peer review reports, as this one shows here, awaiting peer review. It's already collecting usage data, and then also the article is immediately citable. So very much like a preprint, except for you wouldn't then go through the traditional publishing process and kind of that journal cascading and finding a place for it to be officially housed. It is housed here and will stay here throughout that peer review process. So again, highlighting the transparent peer review as it happens. You can see the reports, they're named. We've seen some great examples of really in-depth peer review reports that themselves can be cited. Here's an example of a review report. We can see kind of the major comments. I think the transparency can help in making sure that the discussion is focused on the research itself and ways to improve the article, and not necessarily directed at individual authors. It goes through kind of a versioning process, which I think I have on here we go. So the different ratings that are available as a check means it's approved, it should move forward. The question mark is approved with reservations, that it needs a little bit more work before it moves forward. And then there is a red X, which means not approved, or it would need major revisions. And so the minimal requirements for indexing are 2 checks, or a check and 2 question marks. And I think it's been interesting to see how our authors are moving through this process on the platform. I've seen a lot of new versions being put out that don't necessarily, they've already passed the minimal requirements for indexing, but authors are still really dedicated to addressing any concerns or making the research and the article stronger. So I think that really shows that this should be a version iterative process. It reflects well, I think, on how research actually is conducted, is that it's not, a one and done snapshot of a process, which is kind of how traditional publishing um, uh, results in, but it is more of a conversation. You can also add outside comments on the article. Of course, there is robust criteria to be a peer reviewer that F1000 helps facilitate, as well as if you're going to just comment, you do have to have some sort of affiliation, and that's just to make sure that these comments are well moderated, and it's not just kind of an open comment section on, say, a news article. Yes, so that's the peer review process there. So I'm really all in on versioning. I think that this is definitely a critical component of the future of publishing, is being able to allow authors to update as they see fit and address concerns. I've been part of some work that's really focusing on like retractions and corrections and what those look like. And right now we see that they can often be very fragmented in the space, especially when those things are paywalled. It can be hard as a reader to make those connections between what might be a withdrawal or a correction. All publishers kind of manage it differently. I see this kind of versioning as a way to add transparency to all of that, and kind of clear the muddy waters, so it's very easy to understand why something's been updated, what has been updated, and this gives full transparency to the readers to really understand the whole process, which I think is important in trusting and understanding the research itself. Reproducibility is a big topic, and something that, especially at the foundation, we've been focusing more on. Is like, of course, it's great to have open access to the article and be able to have that as it's almost kind of like an advertisement of the research. But to really understand it and build upon it, we need access to the data and any of the software or other kind of materials used in that research. So F1000 does a fantastic job of helping make those connections and making sure that these are all available when appropriate within the article itself. So here's kind of a data availability section. So we're seeing, link out to repositories. There's also some great examples of articles that include, like, I know one sensitive topic is government data and the sharing of government data. And so we might not be able to just host that in a repository and link to it, but at least call out that this is where the data is available, is where it is from, which I think still adds to that transparency that is needed around data and linking to the tools. And we've seen for our underlying data policy, it is a requirement of our open access policy to have that be available, but seeing that it really depends on where our grantees publish as to how successful as that may be. And it's also helping us from a foundation perspective be able to kind of try to offer more of these supports and making these linkages no matter where the grantee may decide to publish. So again, it's all citable. So something that I'm really excited about too, we launched, I think it's probably almost 2 years ago. So when we launched the initial platform and really socializing it with our program staff and grantees, it really allowed us to have discussions around what does knowledge dissemination of the foundation look like? What are the needs? And I think we learned some really interesting things that we hadn't considered before, is that we can very focused on publishing from a traditional academic sense, but a lot of our grantees and the groups that we support don't really operate in that world and have different needs around sharing information. So with a collaboration with our water sanitation and hygiene team, who have been fantastic and really trying new things in this space, we're looking at how do we have more of a document repository, but not just kind of here's a place where we just stick all these PDFs, but something that's a bit more curated to help our grantees be able to share information and kind of become an information hub for anyone in the public. And so we launched what we essentially call is it's a non-peer reviewed portion. So understanding that not all documents or information artifacts that people want to share that will benefit their community necessarily are appropriate for peer review. But we want to capture and be able to share those things. So we have now documents, slides, and posters. and then gateways and collections in order to kind of house and curate them. And Hannah will talk a bit about the more in a few minutes, but I wanted to kind of give some examples. They're clearly stated as not being peer reviewed, but we're still collecting usage metrics. There's still a lot of great metadata associated with it, so you can kind of understand, like, for example, this was a more of a technical report that came out of a grant, and anyone could kind of look at this, and if you want to build it, go for it. And we do connect it with our grant and contracts, so that helps us be able to see kind of those associated outputs. I think slides and posters have become very popular, especially now that we're in more of a fully virtual space. But even before it allowed us to be able to kind of archive and further share these materials that do take a lot of time and effort and hold a lot of valuable information, but wouldn't be appropriate to submit to kind of a more traditional journal. So these have been very popular and taking off throughout different teams, and we've been experimenting with ways to support different conferences that we're part of, and kind of that digital space. So what do the numbers look like? So this is, since we launched, I think in mid 2017, we have about 286 articles have been published. 195 of those have kind of passed the peer review process. Otherwise, they live on the main platform until the authors decide to address the reviewer concerns and new versions are put out. We've had 119 peer review reports published, which is great. All of those are, accessible for you to read and cite, which is exciting. And then we have about 1,600 documents and posters and slides as well. And one thing that one of my goals in the future is to really help socialize the different kind of article types that can be shared. So not just focusing on kind of that traditional article in the structure that we have it now, but thinking more towards the future of sharing like smaller data notes and sets, maybe just a method, a study protocol. I think case reports are becoming more popular. I love that the open letter is kind of taken off for us, and that's mainly because it was, especially in the time of COVID, there are things we want to communicate to our community, and we need to do it quickly because it's very time sensitive. But the traditional process has not allowed for that. So that's been growing in the past year, which I hope everyone kind of leverages, is that COVID information as well, which is really, if there is a silver lining during the pandemic, it's we are definitely seeing why we need to be more open and transparent and collaborative. And I hope that we continue building upon that and don't go backwards to a more closed system. Visibility and impact is very important. We want to make sure the platform is viewed globally. Readership is very important to our authors. So here's some statistics around downloads and views, the different kind of where things have been cited. And it's been very exciting to see some of this research even before it's maybe past the full peer review process, very similar to kind of the preprint discussions we've had in time of COVID. But seeing these news outlets pick up pieces that have been published on the platform. And then one of the things that I think is really interesting about this model, because it's fully transparent post-publication peer review, we're seeing how kind of quickly we can get through the peer review process, still noting, of course, that quality is important, but especially on topics of COVID or other time sensitive issues, we don't want this information to be kind of in that unknown pipeline of traditional publishing for 6 months to a year. So we're seeing days from submission to publication around 30 days. And then that's the median, and then 118 from days index. So definitely quicker than what can be experienced sometimes in other publication pipelines. And with that, I will turn it over to Hannah.
Thank you. Yeah, so in a nutshell, gateways and collections, they're essentially personalized portals that sit within the Gates Open Research platform, and they allow sort of anyone from program teams within the foundation to foundation-funded institutes, projects, or events to collate and showcase their research. So everything that Ashley's already shown us on the platform and everything we have to offer can be offered through a gateway or collection. And we're really allowing these communities to bring together the various research outputs that Gates Open Research offers. If you could just go on to the next slide. So the International Conference on Family Planning Gateway, this was launched on Gates Open Research following the 5th International Conference, which was held in Rwanda back in 2018. And the Gateway was really launched to provide a place for conference presenters to publish sort of their findings that they presented at the conference as complete papers. So some of the papers that we've had published on the Gateway were quite soon after the conference. Some of these papers we didn't see come through for sort of 18 months after the conference. So it's been really quite a long-term project for us. And the Gateways also accepted posters and slides that were presented at that meeting. And, working with the team at the Family Planning Conference, the aim of the Gateway is really to increase visibility of the research, not only among the conference community who, may have seen these findings being presented at the conference, but then not gone on to view the eventual research paper, but we're also broadening the visibility of this research to an even wider audience. So following the 2018 meeting, as I said, we've seen sort of continual publication really right up until the autumn of last year, and we've published 44 original articles that have all been peer reviewed. The vast majority have been original research articles, but we've also seen a few open letters as well, which have been really interesting to see. The focus of the articles has been really varied. We've had clinical research and sort of program implementation focused pieces, but those open letters have been a lot more broad, covering pieces like policy and advocacy. And as Ashley's already said, it's important to us that everything we publish on Gates Open Research is getting used, that it's reaching the right people and that it's having an impact. So we've got some information here, and it's good to see that we have had a real sort of global reach in terms of the readers and users of the content. One thing that I sort of noticed here was the real disparity between the relatively high number of authors we have in the Gateway from Africa, and yet the sort of relatively low number of readers we have from the continent comparative to other areas, which I think goes to show that there is still work for us to do with the Gateway. For publications going forwards, I'm going to be working with our team at F1000 to look about how we can sort of support authors more in the post-publication process and make sure that we're communicating and outreaching to the right communities to support this research. So on to the last slide. So what comes next, I guess, the Conference for Family Planning Gateway is open for submissions from today's virtual forum, and we'll be continuing the partnership for the November conference. And it will be open for submissions once again to presenters who are presenting at either meeting and would like to follow up their presentation with a complete paper for peer review, or equally would like to submit their academic posters and slide sets to the platform and Gateway. In the meantime, I just encourage you to take a look at the content already published in the Gateway. And I think that takes us on to our last slide. And we can now move on to the Q&A session. So as a reminder, if you have any questions, you should have a grey box on the side of your screen titled questions, and if you just want to type your questions into there, we will try to answer them for you. And we've already had a couple of questions come in during the session. So Ashley, I'm going to ping this first one over to you. and that is, how do other funders view publications in Gates Open Research? Sort of, are they considered equivalent to traditional journal publications?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say in our experience so far, yes, and especially since there are quite a few other funders that have adopted this model. So there's also Wellcome Open Research. We've had some of our grantees kind of cross-publish on there, or collaborations between Wellcome and Gates grantees publish on either of the platforms. And now we have the and Hannah, please correct me if I'm wrong. The platform for the EU, so that's kind of up and running. So I think we're seeing a big shift in funders signaling this, and Hannah could probably say as well. I think there's 8 other funder platforms. So there's with different other funders and kind of academies, and so I think this is very much a model that funders are seeing as the future, and along with that kind of change in publishing structure does come the change in incentives and recognition. So while the platform will never say have an impact factor, everything is citable on it, and we definitely value the outputs on the platform. So I think others are coming along in that thinking as well.
Yeah, I'd wholeheartedly agree with what you said there. Just looking through some more questions here. So another question, which I'm going to head back straight to you, Ashley, is given the fact that versioning intends to add transparency to the whole peer review process, does it take into account sort of metrics or metrics and indicators for each version?
Yes, I believe so far what I've seen with how the F1000 technology manages versioning is that the updated versions are then fully indexed. I'm not quite sure how kind of the accumulated alt metrics would work with that. But I do know that if you say cited it or downloaded a PDF of it, or kind of track the articles, or say you read a version a month ago and you're revisiting the article, like the system is capable of letting you know, hey, there's a new version now, do you want to view it? And then like the pink box that I showed in the slides is kind of, it'll give you a snapshot of what's been addressed in the new version, so that's fully transparent. So that's kind of how I see that work, and I would believe that there could be kind of an accumulation of alt metrics on top of that, but I'm not entirely sure if that's what happens now.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective at F1000, it's quite an interesting one because pretty much all the indexers and all the sort of metric calculators that we work with as publishers don't know how to deal with versioned articles as a rule. Often F1000 has often in the past been one of the first sort of publishers to approach them looking to do this. So I would say, we've made some good steps, but actually we're probably not treating these versions quite as distinctly as we might like to in some of these metrics. And I think there is still a way to go with that.
But I definitely hope to see more publishers kind of taking on this model, as compared to how kind of fractured it is now. If you're trying to see a correction or a retraction or things that I think are seriously addressing issues, that's kind of lost now.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my sort of thoughts to you, Ashley, was to my mind, sort of the concept of versioning could exist for any sort of more traditional publisher. There's no need for it to be accompanied by open peer review if that's not what their community is after. I don't see a good argument against versioning, quite honestly.
Yeah, I think it's probably just plugging into the workflow. So what does that look like from an infrastructure standpoint? I just think that's a barrier that I've seen a lot of discussion around. But I think too, it has to be more intentional as a solution. And sometimes I wonder if just the way things are reissued and dealt with now, and how that ties in with indexing. Are there different motivations at play there? And I think there's more to, at least that's a kind of a gray area for me that I would like to unpack more.
Another question here that we can probably both speak to. Someone's asked, is Gates Open Research building any tools to continue scholarly conversation about a work after the final version of record manuscript is published? I guess from my perspective, I can sort of talk about, it was 2 years ago, I think I'm right in saying, or was it 18 months ago, we sort of launched a sort of more communication side to the platform. So we now have a blog area and social media platforms where we work to really promote articles, and we work with authors to help them engage and promote their articles in that way. We do also have a comments section of the article page as well, where we always encourage people to comment on articles even if they've not been formally invited as a peer reviewer. But I have to say this comment area is very rarely used, and I think that's something that is found across most publisher platforms, not just ours. I don't know, Ashley, what are your sort of thoughts on this? Is this sort of a focus area for you?
Yeah, I think this is a really intriguing question, and I love the idea of like how can we build up more of a community around this. I would say again, I think versioning does play into this a bit, because there is the space allowable for authors to come back and put up a new version, which then can re-engage with peer reviewers and then also be re-engaged with the wider readership community. I would be interested if there are ideas out there of like of how to kind of integrate with other platforms, or what would that look like on the platform itself. I have been very excited about the kind of comms support from F1000 that we've kicked off, because that was kind of a missing piece. So I still feel that's in early development, but has a lot of potential there. And yeah, I agree that the kind of the ability, of course, to get comments and do the extra peer review, we are acknowledging that is a bit of a tax on the whole system overall. But I think as we think about the future of publishing and what really is the role of a platform and that kind of community need, I think there's a lot of room for opportunities there. And I'm excited that this year we're really re-engaging and expanding our advisory board, and I think that too will help shape this direction and help us better understand what are the needs of the community and how can we best meet them.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've just got another question here, which is, does Gates Open Research, or I suppose the foundation more broadly, intend to frame any sort of scholarly communications best practices over the course of time?
Yes, so that another fantastic question. Typically the foundation has had kind of a very agnostic approach to where our grantees publish. Like we don't want there to be any conflict of interest, of course, and we want to have kind of a general, hands off on the kind of the editorial side of things. But I think this is shifting. I mean, we've had the open access policy, and traditionally it's been like, okay, either the journal is compliant or it's not. You can publish there, you can't. Now that it's shifted more to like, you can publish anywhere, but we'll help you find the appropriate open access route. I think there will be, and especially if it's a need of the community, which this is great for me to hear now, because I can take this back internally and say, like, what are these needs? I would love to see us, since there's two kind of main things that I'm looking to develop around this within this year, and then I'm hoping this is just a very much a starting point, but kind of creating an info sheet or checklist for our program staff and grantees around more equitable publishing. So what are some of the things we can look for to that we want our researchers and grantees, and especially our grant funding, to support. So what does that look like? And then I'm also working on a piece that's more around gender dynamics. So when program staff are having conversations with grantees on where, how to publish, a brief checklist of like, how do we make sure that we're inclusive, we're highlighting attributions as we should. And I think that definitely ties too into what publishing partners do we have that really facilitate those things. So I think it was last year that F1000 launched the ability to be able to have authors change their name from their dead name if they have a new name, and be able to correct that record, which is really, really important. And so highlighting which partners support those things, I think will be more important as the foundation especially is taking more of an equitable lens. How do we live our values when we want to make sure that we are partnering and supporting those who espouse the same values?
There's one question which I can probably very briefly answer, and that's someone asking me whether F1000 involves library professionals internationally for sort of global collaboration. And the answer to that is definitely yes, but we're always keen to do so more. Everything we have tried to do in terms of building Gates Open Research and building this publication model has sort of been in response to what people have told us they want publishing to look like. A lot of people are good at telling us or talking about the fact that publishing doesn't work, but we're really keen to talk to people who think they have an idea for how it could be made better. So definitely, I think our email addresses are on the screen. So if you are interested in sharing your ideas about how the platform currently works or how it should work in the future, then we are always super willing to chat with you and find out more.
Yes, and I love that came from the librarian perspective. I'm a librarian by career, and I think one of my goals too from kind of the foundation work that we're doing is to engage more with libraries moving forward, because I think that's been kind of a missed opportunity of funders collaborating with libraries through policy, and especially payment of infrastructure in the space. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, and just a couple more things that probably don't need a full answer right now, but definitely will be things that Ashley and I can take away. So we've got a couple of people commenting that we also perhaps didn't mention South America quite as much as we should have, and another area that we definitely need to focus on when we're thinking about the family planning gateway, and also asking whether we'll have a collection of youth-specific articles and materials. And again, not something that we currently have within that gateway or elsewhere on the platform, but something that I'll take away and look into. And again, please do reach out if you think there's something that we could be building that we're not currently.
Yes.
I think that's all of the. Sorry, go ahead, Ashley.
Oh, I was just gonna say on that note too, we've been having discussions around language, which is important, and how can the foundation also support kind of editing services and the education around especially for early career researchers, that how do you write an article, and what are some of the things to look for. So I think we have a lot of opportunity there to kind of amp that up, but it'd be good to hear kind of what the community needs are around that. Just wanted to add that.
Definitely, thank you very much. So I think that's all the questions that we're going to get through today. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us and who's asked questions. We really appreciate you taking the time and engaging with us. Yeah, it gives us lots of food for thought. So just a reminder, you can always head to gatesopenresearch.org to find more on the platform, and feel free to reach out to any of the email addresses on screen if you'd like to discuss anything further. There will be a recording of this event made available after the session, so please do feel free to share that when it's shared with you in a couple of days' time.
Do you want to shout out we have a handout attached? Is that something people should look at?
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, so we do. We have a little handout which is just an infographic, especially for those of you who are joining us today from the Family Planning Forum and who are particularly interested in the Family Planning Gateway. There's an infographic attached which gives you a little bit more information about that gateway and what's involved in submitting to it. So I'll leave it there for today. Thank you once again, and I will say goodbye.
Great, thank you so much.